In the autumn of 1942, while the Axis powers appeared unstoppable in Europe, a small group of American strategists in Washington prepared a mission so secret that even many within the Allied command would never hear of it. The newly formed Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, was tasked with building an invisible army in Nazi-occupied France. It was an audacious gamble to plant American and British agents deep inside enemy territory, to collect intelligence, organize resistance, and sabotage the German war machine from within. The operation began under the direction of General William Wild Bill Donovan, a decorated hero from the First World War and a visionary in modern espionage. Donovan believed that victory would not come from brute force alone, but from deception, intelligence, and the courage of small, unseen teams. He authorized the creation of covert networks across occupied Europe, France being the most critical. The German military relied heavily on France for resources, transport routes, and defensive positions along the Atlantic Wall. Cutting those arteries would weaken their entire Western Front. The OSS drew inspiration from Britain's Special Operations Executive, the SOE, which had been running sabotage missions since 1940. Together, they began recruiting multilingual operatives, Americans with French heritage, exiled Free French officers, and even civilians trained at secret camps in Britain. At Camp X in Ontario and Milton Hall in England, these men and women learned the art of silent killing, code breaking, parachuting, and survival behind enemy lines. They would later become the backbone of what would be known as the OSS spy networks in France. The first agents arrived under the guise of business people, farmers, and Red Cross workers. They operated from Paris to Lyon, from Brittany's coastlines to the mountainous borders of Switzerland and Spain. Their lifeline to London was the radio transmitter, compact yet dangerous. The German Sicherheitsdienst, SD, had perfected radio tracking vans that could triangulate a signal in less than 20 minutes. Every transmission was a race against death. In a report dated December 1942, OSS London Station recorded, "Intelligence from field agents indicates effective infiltration into German rail dispatch offices near Tours. Resistance cells now capable of minor sabotage." This brief entry belied the peril faced by those on the ground. Dozens of agents had already been captured or executed. The Gestapo considered them not soldiers, but spies, and the punishment for espionage was death without trial. Still, the networks grew. American agents worked hand in hand with local French maquisards, rural resistance fighters armed with little more than old rifles and fierce determination. Together, they mapped German troop convoys, documented ammunition depots, and guided downed Allied airmen to safety. Each message smuggled out of France brought the Allies closer to understanding the strength and weakness of the German occupation. But secrecy came at a price. The OSS was so compartmentalized that agents in the field rarely knew who else was working nearby. In some cases, entire cells were wiped out, and headquarters had no idea until months later. The paranoia was suffocating. Was the courier truly resistance, or a Gestapo double? Who could be trusted when betrayal meant torture and execution? One agent's diary, recovered decades later from the ruins of a farmhouse in Normandy, read simply, "Our orders are unclear. We wait for contact that never comes. Sometimes I wonder if London remembers we exist." That sense of abandonment haunted many operatives, whose missions were often left unfinished as shifting Allied priorities focused on the upcoming invasion. By early 1943, 5 distinct OSS networks had begun taking shape, each with its own codename, area of operation, and objective. Among them were Jedburgh, Pegasus, Hermes, Phantom, and one other whose name never appeared in any surviving OSS file. It was rumored to have operated in the Loire region under complete radio silence, its members communicating only through hidden signals and church bell codes. Historians still debate whether this 5th network ever officially existed. Some claim it was merely an early resistance cell absorbed into the OSS. Others believe it was a deliberate ghost operation, a decoy meant to confuse German intelligence. What is known is that reports began surfacing of mysterious sabotage events in 1943, railway bridges destroyed with explosives the Allies claimed no responsibility for. The story of these secret OSS networks begins here, in the shadows of occupied France, where courage, secrecy, and sacrifice intertwined. As the Allies prepared for the great invasion of Europe, these invisible soldiers were already fighting, often alone, with no promise of survival. Many would vanish, their names erased from official records, their missions buried beneath decades of classified files. And yet, the echoes of their transmissions still linger, faint signals in the static of history. Their story, long hidden, is only beginning to emerge from the archives. In the next part, the first of these networks, codenamed Jedburgh, would take to the skies and parachute into a land ruled by fear, carrying nothing but false identities, cyanide capsules, and the hopes of a coming liberation. It was the night of June 5th, 1944, just hours before D-Day. Over the darkened skies of central France, Allied planes flew low, their engines muffled by the clouds. Inside one of them sat a three-man team, their parachutes strapped tight, nerves steeled by training and fear. They were the men of Operation Jedburgh, elite commandos of the OSS and the British Special Operations Executive, dropped behind enemy lines to ignite a nationwide uprising. Each Jedburgh team consisted of 3 operatives, 1 American, 1 British, and 1 French. They were small in number but immense in purpose. Their mission: to organize, arm, and lead local resistance forces in sabotage operations that would cripple German communication and logistics ahead of the Normandy landings. Between June and September 1944, 93 such teams would jump into occupied France. Theirs was not just a military mission, it was a gamble of trust, courage, and timing. One of the first teams, codenamed Team James, parachuted into the Limoges region shortly before dawn. The drop went wrong. Strong winds scattered the men miles apart. Captain George Miller, the American commander, landed in a field of wheat and was forced to bury his radio under a hedgerow as German patrols closed in. By morning, only 2 of the 3 agents had regrouped. Their French guide, a young resistance courier named Lucien, whispered to them, "The Maquis are waiting in the forest." There would be no turning back. Across the country, similar stories unfolded. Teams Her, Giles, and Iron landed in the Loire, the Massif Central, and the Rhône Valley, respectively. They carried small supply drops of Sten guns, explosives, and British-made Mark II radios. Their first challenge was to make contact with existing resistance cells, groups that were often fragmented, suspicious, and in some cases infiltrated by German informants. The Gestapo had grown increasingly efficient at hunting partisans, executing entire villages as retribution for sabotage. Still, the Jedburghs persisted. Through coded broadcasts from London, messages disguised as ordinary BBC phrases like "the tulips bloom early this year," they received instructions and coordinated with the advancing Allied command. Bridges were blown, railway lines cut, and convoys ambushed under the cover of darkness. The Germans, already stretched thin, found themselves fighting a phantom army that seemed to appear and disappear at will. A field report from Team Ian, dated June 20th, reads, "Our Maquis now number 250 men. We've destroyed 4 railway lines and 1 German supply depot. Casualties heavy, morale high, expecting counterattack." 3 days later, that report's author, Lieutenant Robert Hastings of the British SOE, was captured. His team was never seen again. According to post-war German records, a firefight had erupted near the village of Montmouchet, where more than 200 partisans were executed. Hastings' body was never recovered. What made the Jedburgh operations so extraordinary was the balance they struck between military precision and improvisation. These men were not conventional soldiers. They lived among farmers, priests, and schoolteachers, blending into the very soil of occupied France. Their uniforms were often hidden beneath civilian clothes, their pistols wrapped in rags, their parachutes buried beneath haystacks. Each mission demanded creativity as much as courage. Yet the most enduring mystery of the Jedburghs lies in the missions that vanished from official record. Some teams, like Team Lynx in Brittany, completed their objectives and rejoined Allied forces as heroes. Others, such as Team Glass, disappeared after their first transmission. Post-war debriefs make no mention of them, and no remains were ever found. Some historians believe they were betrayed by double agents within the resistance. Others suggest they continued operating well into the liberation, under assumed names. One declassified OSS memo, written months after D-Day, simply notes, 5 Jedburgh units unaccounted for in France. Status: unknown. No follow-up appears in the archives. Survivors spoke of coded radio messages that suddenly went silent, of scheduled airdrops that never occurred, of meetings in barns that turned into Gestapo traps. One French resistance fighter recalled, "They came from the sky and fought like ghosts. Then one day they were gone." Despite the losses, the impact of the Jedburghs was profound. Their sabotage delayed German reinforcements moving toward Normandy, giving the Allies a critical advantage. Eisenhower himself later wrote that the resistance, guided by Allied agents, was worth an entire fighting army. For the men of the OSS, it was proof that small, secret networks could alter the course of a world war. As Paris rose in liberation that August, remnants of the Jedburgh teams emerged from hiding, gaunt, exhausted, but victorious. Many others remained unaccounted for, their missions classified for decades after the war. Even now, the fate of some teams remains a mystery buried in the forests and farmlands of central France. But the OSS would not stop there. In the months that followed, new networks emerged, each more daring than the last. One of them, operating under the codename Pegasus, would risk everything to intercept German troop movements along the Loire Valley. Yet, what began as an intelligence triumph would soon unravel into silence, the kind that only the dead or the disappeared can keep. By late 1943, the German occupation of France had evolved into a state of constant vigilance. Checkpoints, curfews, and random raids defined daily life, especially along the Loire Valley, a strategic corridor that linked Paris to the Atlantic and the Southern Front. It was here that the OSS launched one of its most elusive intelligence operations, Network Pegasus. The mission's goal was simple but perilous: to monitor and report the movement of German divisions heading north or west toward the expected Allied invasion zones. Every convoy, every train carrying ammunition or tanks, needed to be tracked and reported to London. To achieve this, Pegasus agents had to operate within miles of major German command posts, often posing as postal clerks, rail workers, or even collaborators. One wrong glance, one misplaced document, meant certain death. The network's founding officer, Captain Daniel Dan Whitmore, had been an engineer before the war, fluent in French and trained by the OSS's London station. He arrived in France in October 1943 under the identity Jean Leclerc, a traveling textile merchant. His second-in-command, Marguerite Lefebvre, was a local schoolteacher and a member of the underground resistance cell Liberté. Together, they recruited a network of informants stretching from Orléans to Angers, farmers who counted passing convoys, telegraph operators who eavesdropped on Wehrmacht communications, and priests who hid transmitters in bell towers. The Pegasus team's radio transmissions began appearing on OSS monitoring logs in November 1943. Using a Mark III Type III suitcase transmitter, they sent coded reports twice weekly. These transmissions, disguised within civilian radio frequencies, carried vital intelligence on the deployment of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich. Their reports would later help Allied planners predict German troop reinforcements to Normandy in June 1944. But radio signals in occupied France were hunted with a vengeance. The Gestapo and the Sicherheitsdienst deployed mobile direction-finding vans, their antennas sweeping for faint transmissions that might betray hidden agents. The radio operators of Pegasus, codenamed Falcon and Scribe, worked only at night, never more than 15 minutes per session, always on the move. They disguised antennas as washing lines and buried spare equipment in churchyards. Still, the net around them tightened. In early May 1944, disaster struck. A German patrol intercepted a courier near Tours carrying fragments of a coded message. Under interrogation, the courier broke, revealing the address of a farmhouse used as a safe house. When the Gestapo raided it days later, they found the transmitter still warm. 2 operators were captured, their radio journals confiscated. Within weeks, several Pegasus members were rounded up, including Marguerite Lefebvre. She was executed at Freynes prison on June 16, 1944, the day after the Allies landed in Normandy. From that moment, the Pegasus transmissions fell silent. London received no further signals. OSS headquarters in Baker Street marked the network as presumed destroyed. And yet, scattered reports suggest something more complex. French villagers later recalled hearing coded broadcasts on local radios weeks after the network's supposed fall, messages signed with the call sign Pegasus 1. Some claimed these were fakes, transmitted by the Gestapo to entrap surviving agents. Others believed Whitmore had escaped capture and continued operations independently. Decades later, in 1978, fragments of Pegasus radio logs were discovered in a British archive mislabeled under miscellaneous intercepts. Among them were reports dated July and August 1944, long after the network's presumed annihilation. One message read simply, "Bridge at Saumur destroyed, casualties unknown, Pegasus remains." No Allied record exists confirming the destruction of the bridge, and no official source could verify who sent that final transmission. Historians remain divided. Some see it as proof that Whitmore survived and continued to sabotage German routes even as the Allies advanced. Others suspect the message was planted, a psychological trick meant to bolster resistance morale or mislead German intelligence. Either way, the fate of Captain Whitmore and the remaining Pegasus agents remains unresolved. His name appears on neither OSS casualty lists nor post-war debriefs. He vanished from history as quietly as his last broadcast. One OSS field note written after liberation reads, almost as an epitaph, "Pegasus achieved limited success, but at great cost. Their intelligence delayed one armored division by 48 hours. Agents unaccounted for, presumed dead, or absorbed by Maquis." The Loire Valley today bears little trace of their struggle. Vineyards and quiet towns mask the locations where Pegasus couriers once hid coded messages in wine barrels and carved signals into door frames. Yet in some archives, faded signatures and intercepted coordinates tell a story of sacrifice and mystery. A network that lived briefly, died violently, and perhaps for a moment, survived beyond all expectation. As the Allies pushed deeper into France, the OSS turned its attention to a new frontier, the southern resistance corridors stretching from Toulouse to the Pyrenees. There, another network took shape, one that blended rescue missions with sabotage, and whose leader would vanish into the fog of war. Its name was Hermes, and its story would become one of the most haunting disappearances of the entire OSS campaign in France, southern France, 1944. The war had entered its most volatile phase. Following the Normandy landings, German forces began to retreat southward, hunted by Allied bombers and harassed by resistance fighters. Yet for those trapped behind enemy lines, the struggle was far from over. It was in this crucible of chaos that the OSS launched its most daring and mysterious network, codenamed Hermes. The Hermes network's mission was twofold: to maintain intelligence channels in southern France and to aid the escape of downed Allied pilots through the Pyrenees into neutral Spain. It was a task that demanded secrecy, courage, and trust. The operation was led by Major William Donovan Jr., the son of the OSS's founding director. Trained in London under British SOE supervision, Donovan Jr. was known for his intellect and calm composure. Fluent in French and Spanish, he could move between occupied territories with uncanny ease. His personal codename was Atlas. In early May 1944, Donovan and a small team of 5, 2 radio operators, 2 couriers, and a demolitions expert, parachuted into the countryside near Toulouse. They were greeted by members of the Maquis du Temps, a rugged resistance group that had been ambushing German patrols and sabotaging supply trains since 1943. From a farmhouse hidden deep in the Black Mountains, the Hermes team established contact with London using a Type 3 Mark II transmitter, disguised inside a wooden crate labelled agricultural supplies. Their first message, sent May 19th, read Hermes active, establishing route south, pilot safe, awaiting further orders. Within weeks, the network became a lifeline for Allied airmen shot down during bombing raids over France. Using false identity papers and civilian disguises, Hermes agents guided more than 40 aviators through a chain of safe houses stretching from Toulouse to the Spanish border. Farmers, priests, and even nuns joined the effort, hiding fugitives in wine cellars or beneath church floors. One of the escapees, a US B-17 navigator named Thomas Ellery, later recalled, "They moved us by night from barn to barn, each place with a new password. They never used our names, only code numbers. The man they called Atlas told us never to look back." But Hermes was more than an escape line. Donovan's orders from London were to coordinate local resistance in preparation for Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of southern France scheduled for August 1944. His team began sabotaging German rail networks near Carcassonne and Montpellier, targeting trains carrying reinforcements to the northern front. Every successful explosion drew closer the inevitable German response. In July, that response came. Acting on intelligence from a captured courier, the Gestapo launched a sweep across the Tarn region. Dozens of Maquis were killed or taken prisoner. Several Hermes safe houses were raided. Still, Donovan and his core team remained undetected. Their last confirmed transmission was sent on July 28, 1944. Pressure increasing. Relocating base. Contact next on August 2nd. No further messages were ever received. When Allied forces liberated Toulouse 3 weeks later, OSS command expected Hermes to re-establish contact. They never did. Major Donovan and his entire unit had vanished. Search parties found the remnants of a burned-out farmhouse near Mazamet, the supposed radio base. Among the ashes were fragments of an American field transmitter, charred code sheets, and a single dog tag bearing the inscription WJD, but no bodies were recovered. Post-war investigations offered several theories. One claimed that the team was betrayed by a double agent within the Maquis, possibly coerced under torture. Another suggested that Donovan was captured and executed in secret by the SS, his remains buried in an unmarked grave in the Pyrenees. A third, more enigmatic hypothesis emerged from Spanish records, that an American officer matching Donovan's description was detained by border guards near Andorra in late August 1944, claiming to be a Red Cross worker. No follow-up documentation was ever found. For years, the US government maintained silence. In 1947, a classified OSS memo titled Hermes Status Report noted tersely, all operatives presumed KIA, mission closure incomplete, cryptographic material unrecovered. Yet even decades later, declassified British files suggest London continued monitoring French border transmissions for Hermes call sign, Echo Blue. One faint transmission, recorded on August 22, 1944, read, Hermes remains, Atlas safe. Whether genuine or a German deception, no one could prove. To this day, the fate of Major Donovan Jr. and his network remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the OSS. His disappearance struck deeply within Allied intelligence circles, not merely because of his lineage, but because of the symbolism. The son of the man who built America's secret war machine had vanished into the very shadows he helped create. The Pyrenean winds still whisper through the passes where Hermes couriers once trekked under starlight, guiding pilots toward freedom. Local villagers still tell stories of the American who never came back. Some claim to have seen Allied uniforms burned in the valleys. Others speak of coded carvings on the rocks, an H crossed with a lightning bolt, the symbol of Hermes. The OSS would never find its missing men, but the lessons of Hermes endured. Secrecy, sacrifice, and silence had become the trademarks of modern intelligence. In the months that followed, as Germany's occupation crumbled, a new OSS network emerged, one designed to strike at retreating German forces and sow chaos in their final days. Its name was Phantom. And though its operations would shake the enemy's grip on France, betrayal from within would seal its tragic fate. By the closing months of 1944, France was beginning to breathe again. Allied armies pressed eastward toward the Rhine, while in the liberated cities, the tricolour flag flew once more. Yet in the shadows of retreating German columns, a new war unfolded. One fought not on open battlefields, but in cellars, forests, and train yards. The OSS network known as Phantom was born into this twilight of occupation, created to cripple the enemy's final defences and ensure their retreat became a rout. The Phantom network operated primarily in the Alsace-Lorraine region, where remnants of German units were regrouping under orders to delay the Allied advance at any cost. OSS officers believed a swift, targeted sabotage campaign could prevent the establishment of these defensive positions. Their brief: to destroy bridges, sever rail lines, and disrupt command centres, a campaign of disruption in the heart of collapsing Nazi control. Led by OSS officer Captain Richard Halperin, a former New York stockbroker turned intelligence operative, Phantom drew from an unusual mix of operatives. There were American-trained Jedburgh veterans, remnants of disbanded French resistance cells, and even a handful of captured German defectors who had turned against the Reich. Codenamed Revenant, Echo, and Luke, their operations began in November 1944, as the Battle of the Bulge erupted to the north. The Phantom agents worked out of the Vosges Mountains, a labyrinth of forests, caves, and abandoned mines ideal for guerrilla warfare. At night, they moved silently through fog-choked valleys, planting explosives along railways used by retreating German convoys. They transmitted updates to London using portable B2 radios, signing each message with their eerie call sign, Phantom in place. One of their early missions targeted the bridge at Saverne, a key supply route for the 19th Army. On December 9th, the Phantom demolition team succeeded in detonating charges beneath the main span, just as a German transport train crossed. The explosion sent dozens of rail cars into the river below, a tactical victory that paralyzed enemy movements for days. But success came with exposure. The Gestapo launched an immediate investigation, sweeping through nearby villages and arresting anyone suspected of aiding Allied forces. The OSS archives later revealed that one of Phantom's local contacts, a cafe owner named Henri Dumas, was arrested that same week. Under torture, he reportedly disclosed the names of several operatives, including the network's radio officer, Echo. Days later, Allied monitoring stations intercepted a chilling transmission. Phantom breached. Silence required. After that, the network went dark. For weeks, there was no word. OSS headquarters in London classified Phantom as compromised but potentially operational. It was a bureaucratic phrase that concealed the growing fear that the entire unit had been captured. Then, in January 1945, a new message arrived from somewhere near Strasbourg. Revenant continues. Operation underway. No return expected. It would be Phantom's final verified transmission. Post-war records pieced together a grim picture. The Gestapo, having penetrated the network through informants, staged a trap near Colmar. Several Phantom agents walked into it, believing they were meeting an Allied contact. They were captured, transported to Frayne prison, and later sent to Buchenwald concentration camp, where at least 7 OSS operatives were executed in March 1945. Among them, reportedly, was Captain Halperin himself. Yet the story doesn't end there. When the US Army liberated Buchenwald the following month, among the survivors were 2 men claiming to have been OSS couriers attached to Phantom. Their debriefs, however, raised more questions than they answered. One insisted that the real Halperin had escaped before capture, disguised as a German officer. The other swore he'd seen the captain executed. Both men were emaciated, their accounts fragmented by trauma and exhaustion. No definitive record of Halperin's fate was ever found. Adding to the mystery, a final coded message surfaced in OSS archives in 1946. It had been intercepted by a US signals unit operating in Bavaria, dated April 1945, weeks after Phantom's presumed annihilation. The message read, "Phantom still active. Target complete. France, free." The source of the transmission was never traced. Historians have long debated the origins of that final message. Some argue it was a simple error, a rebroadcast of an older code fragment misinterpreted by Allied operators. Others believe it was sent by surviving Phantom agents still working autonomously in eastern France, continuing their mission long after formal orders ceased. For a few, the idea that Phantom truly lived up to its name, an unseen, untraceable presence, remains tantalizingly symbolic. Today, small memorials in Alsace mark the sites of Phantom sabotage operations. Weathered plaques name resistance fighters, but omit the OSS operatives who trained and led them. Their identities remain hidden in classified files, their stories scattered across British, French, and American archives. To the locals, they were simply les ombres, the shadows. The collapse of Phantom marked both an end and a beginning. With France liberated, the OSS prepared for its next transformation into a permanent intelligence organization that would shape the Cold War era. But as victory dawned, questions remained unanswered. Who survived? Who betrayed them? And what of the networks that were never officially acknowledged? As the guns fell silent in Europe, the OSS dissolved. But buried deep in its declassified files were traces of other networks. Unnamed, unacknowledged, their missions redacted beyond recognition. Some scholars believe these were continuations of the 5 original networks, kept alive in secret even after the war's end. In the next and final part, we explore what became of those who fought in the shadows, and how the legacy of these vanished OSS networks shaped the birth of modern espionage. When the war ended in May 1945, Europe exhaled. The occupation was over, cities rose from rubble, and millions emerged from the long night of tyranny. Yet for those who had lived in secrecy, the spies, saboteurs, and invisible soldiers of the OSS, peace did not bring clarity. It brought silence. The 5 networks that had operated in occupied France, Jedburgh, Pegasus, Hermes, Phantom, and the unnamed 5th, were disbanded or absorbed into other agencies. Their agents melted back into civilian life, their stories buried under official secrecy, and from that silence, new mysteries were born. The Office of Strategic Services, having fulfilled its wartime purpose, was officially dissolved in October 1945. Much of its structure, personnel, and mission were transferred to a new institution, the Central Intelligence Agency. But the OSS's legacy in France remained clouded. Thousands of pages of reports were sealed, classified, or destroyed. Many operatives never received recognition or even confirmation that their missions had been recorded. Their names appeared only in fragmentary post-war documents, handwritten notes, partial debriefs, and incomplete radio logs. What they accomplished and what they endured was left largely to speculation. Among those missing was Major William Donovan Jr., leader of the Hermes network. His name resurfaced briefly in a 1946 memo from US Army intelligence, which mentioned unverified sightings of an American officer near the Franco-Spanish border months after the war's end. Nothing came of it. Another mystery surrounded the final transmission of the Phantom network, the message claiming France free. When analyzed years later, cryptographers concluded it had been sent from somewhere near Zurich, Switzerland, an area beyond Phantom's known operational range. How it reached Allied channels remains unexplained. Even the Jedburgh teams, whose exploits were better documented, carried their own enigma. In 1948, the remains of a 3-man team were discovered in a wooded area near Limoges. 2 identified, 1 never named. Yet the local villagers who helped bury them swore there had been a 4th man, a foreigner who vanished the night of the firefight. His existence was never confirmed, his name never recorded. In a war of ghosts, such absences were not unusual. After the war, fragments of these networks continued to function unofficially. In the turbulent first years of the Cold War, former OSS agents in France and Western Europe were quietly recruited into new intelligence projects aimed at countering Soviet influence. Operation Stay Behind, later known as Gladio, bore striking similarities to the wartime OSS systems. Hidden caches of weapons, secret radio networks, and civilian operatives trained for sabotage in case of invasion. Whether these post-war efforts were continuations of the 5 OSS networks or simply inspired by them remains debated. Many of the files were never declassified. In the decades that followed, scattered discoveries hinted at unfinished business. In 1963, French hikers uncovered rusted radio parts in a cave near Mazamet, precisely where the Hermes network had last been active. In 1978, British intelligence declassified fragments of Pegasus communications long believed lost, and in 1992, an anonymous letter delivered to the US Embassy in Paris claimed to possess OSS field codes and burial locations for agents missing since 1944. The writer was never identified. The information was deemed inconclusive. But perhaps the most haunting revelation came in 2004, when a private researcher uncovered a classified OSS file titled Residual French Operations. Inside were lists of unconfirmed radio transmissions received between August 1944 and February 1946, months after France's liberation. Among them was one signature familiar to every wartime analyst, Pegasus 1. The message, decoded partially, read, "Network intact, continuing orders, awaiting new contact." It was dated December 1945, 6 months after Germany's surrender. No one could explain it. No one could confirm its authenticity. But its implications were staggering. Had one of the OSS networks survived, continuing in secret after the war, perhaps as part of an early Cold War intelligence effort? Or was it simply a ghost signal? the echo of transmissions lost in the static of history. Today, the descendants of these agents still search for answers. In archives from Washington to London to Paris, historians sift through brittle documents and coded cables, piecing together fragments of a vast, invisible war. The OSS's role in occupied France remains one of courage and tragedy. Men and women who risked everything to free a nation, yet whose victories were so secret they were almost forgotten. A declassified OSS summary from 1946 captures the paradox best. Success measured by absence, the mission unseen, the agent unknown, the victory without record. The true legacy of the five networks lies not only in the intelligence they gathered or the railways they destroyed, but in the model they created. Small, autonomous units guided by trust, adaptability, and silence. From their methods would emerge the doctrine of modern espionage, the very foundation of post-war intelligence across the Western world. And yet, amid the triumph of liberation and the birth of the CIA, one final mystery remains unsolved. What became of those who stayed behind when the orders ceased, whose radios kept whispering through the winter static of 1945? Were they remnants of the OSS or pioneers of a new hidden war? Perhaps we will never know. Perhaps, as one historian once wrote, their names were erased not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. The five most secret OSS spy networks of WWII in occupied France, Jedburgh, Pegasus, Hermes, Phantom, and the unnamed fifth, did not just shape the outcome of the war, they reshaped the art of intelligence itself. And somewhere in the archives, perhaps still buried under layers of dust and redacted ink, the ghosts of their transmissions continue to whisper across time. Proof that even in silence, the shadows endure.